Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Social Work 12th podcast. I'm Taylor, and today, again, we're going to be talking about consulting. There's so much to talk about, so I'm happy to be joined by Amber, and she'll tell us a little bit about, her background and her transition into consulting. I think I mentioned this in our last consulting episode with Chrissy, which if you haven't checked that out, definitely please do that. She dropped some gems in that episode. But yeah, consulting just feels kind of ambiguous to us that have never done it, and so I'm really appreciative of having social workers come on and talk to us about that. So yeah, let's get into it. Thanks for joining us, Amber. Really
Thank
appreciate
you for
it.
having me.
Yeah. So when did you graduate with your MSW? What year?
That was in 2014 from University of Texas in Austin.
Okay.
And
What
it's
were
special
you?
there. You
Uh
get an
huh.
MSSW, a Master of Science of Social Work.
Oh, you
Um, and
fancy.
yeah, well, yeah, I think that's where all the extra debt came from for the extra S.
Oh, oh no.
And I was you can do two concentrations like most folks know, micro and macro. And I was the macro track, which focused on I forget exactly what the acronym stood for, but it was CAL. I think it was Community Administrative Leadership. So, like other macro social workers focusing on shaking up systems and policies that impact people.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Tell us a little bit about like your internships and how that informed what you wanted to do after grad school.
I will start a little bit further back before grad school. In
Okay.
undergrad, and I won't be before you long. Um, And for undergrad, I was pursuing a psychology degree with the intent to become a clinical psychologist. So either get a PsyD or a PhD. And in between junior and senior year, I took a trip to the Philippines, and that was my first experience in a third world country. I didn't really know what that term meant. And we spent time with the ultra rich and the most impoverished folks in the community. There's no middle. And that's when I realized like I need to be in a position where I can change systems and I can impact as many people as possible. And I don't feel that I can do that as a clinical psychologist. And also, I don't really enjoy school. And so I wasn't interested in changing my degree and staying around longer. So I wrapped up one more year and got the psychology degree and then spent some time thinking about what what's next. What other, I know I need an additional degree. So what do I do? And I ultimately landed on social work. And I had two internships. One of them, oh gosh, one of them was a full academic year, and that was at a nonprofit that focused on older adults. And they didn't really have experience with macro social work interns. And so, you know, that placement was fulfilling to a certain degree, but they weren't really equipped to um, kind of shape me into a macro social worker. And then you have your final internship, which is just a semester long. And uh, that remains, even though it was 10 years ago or 11 years ago, gosh, that remains kind of like one of the highlights of my career. This was
Wow.
with the Health and Human Services Department for a county, and I was in this tiny little team for it was research and planning division, and most of the folks on the team happened to be social workers, also macro social workers, and that's when I learned about I saw what program evaluation looked like in real time. I learned the concept of capacity building and technical assistance, and this concept of kind of serving as an intermediary for your community. And so, um, folks, community members want to communicate with government and other decision making entities, but it's not easy to do that. And so, you're in this like middle this intermediary role, and you can liaise between and advocate for folks who don't have easy access to power, and then convene folks with different opinions, and you're this neutral party who's just there to help people reach a middle. And so that was just fantastic. And I am forever grateful for the supervisors that I had and the time that I spent there.
That sounds really interesting. And I didn't know that there were some internships that you would only do for a semester and one that you would do for a year. That's different.
Yeah, I guess I mean, obviously it varies by school, but that was the norm there.
Yeah. So from that internship, like what were you looking for, after you graduated and what did you end up landing into?
I, like I said, I fell in love with program evaluation specifically. And I was like, I'm going to be a program evaluator. And goodness knows, a couple hundred applications later,
Yeah.
I wasn't a program evaluator. I was still unemployed.
Yeah,
And now I
yeah.
have debt. And
Yeah.
that job application process started with I'm applying for these jobs that sound like they would be fantastic. And then after a while, the caliber of the jobs kind of it shifts. And it's like, you know what? I think I would get a paycheck with this job. So let me
Yeah.
apply here.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it just
Standards
didn't,
go down.
yes, your standards go down a lot. And your expectations, and kind of your hopes also can be impacted, and you start to question your competency and your capability.
Yeah.
And so um, I heard about AmeriCorps, and there's a part of AmeriCorps that's a specific program, AmeriCorps Vista, which is geared towards uh, so I think AmeriCorps, like the kind of traditional chapter of it, um, tends to recruit a lot of folks who are maybe just out of high school or maybe even maybe undergrad age. And Vista is for a little bit later in career, but still kind of early career. And they put you in professional capacity building settings. And I felt like, well, I'm qualified for it. I really didn't want to apply though, because one of their models is to not really pay you.
Yeah.
um, yeah, and so I applied for a role in Virginia, and I got it, knowing, and I accepted it knowing that I was going to make, I believe it was like $840 a month net, and I still had my $250 a month car payment. And I was renting rooms in Virginia for like $400. And so I said, well,
Wow.
it's a job. And I didn't know. I said, it's a job.
Wow.
And on paper, I was like, some of this sounds really interesting and I'll figure it out. And I did. At the time, I was kind of in an in between temporary living with my dad. And it was just, I don't know. I was at that point in life where I didn't want to live with my parents anymore.
Yeah.
Um, and so I left, and I moved to Virginia for this role. And I burned through my savings very quickly, as you can imagine. You're not supposed to have another job outside of AmeriCorps. I did. Worked at a bar and I got paid cash, just to
I mean,
kind
like,
of,
how do they expect people to live? That is just wild.
it was fascinating to me. And so, the Vista agreement is 12 months. At month two or maybe month three, I was like, I can't afford to keep this job. And I told my supervisor, and I said, I'm going to have to step away and move back to Michigan because I can't afford to do this for, 8, 9 more months.
Yeah.
And she, yet another really fantastic supervisor, um, she was like, all right, let me see what I can do. And she did a couple of things for me. She she connected me with one of her girlfriends who lived in the city, and got me into a rental. How do I word it? Like I rented a house with her friend, and her friend was charging me like nothing. And then she offered me a full-time staff position.
Wow.
And I didn't negotiate because I didn't know how to negotiate. And I was just grateful to make more than $800 a month.
Wow.
And so about 3, 4 months into the AmeriCorps agreement, I kind of broke my agreement with them and then started as a continued in the role, but as a full-time staff member there.
Okay. And what were you doing there?
I was a continuum of care coordinator, and super brief just explanation. A continuum of care, or COC, is a federally mandated collaboration of regions and organizations to prevent and end homelessness in your region. And so
Oh.
I worked with a lot of nonprofits and some government entities in the Shenandoah Valley in Virginia.
Hmm. Okay. Wow. What a journey. And kudos to that supervisor. MVP.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I want to go back to talking about program evaluation because I'd like for you to explain a little bit about what that looks like and why you were so interested in it. And yeah, give us the deets.
hmm I am drawn to program evaluation for a handful of reasons. One of the reasons is that it allows you to be fairly objective in assessing how a program is designed, how it's implemented, and the impacts that it has. And it allows you to be relatively objective because you are looking at like client data,
Mm-hmm.
perhaps, or
Mm-hmm.
internal administrative data around just like policies and procedures for a program or finances. And you can couple that quantitative numbers with real people. And so that's qualitative data. And so interviews and focus groups. And I love pairing the two to tell the whole story of what is or is not working, and also help people either validate expectations that they or validate expectations that they have for their program or their organization, or allow them to kind of press pause and identify some gaps and then piece together a plan for how to fill the gaps and actually do the things that they say that they do.
Mm-hmm.
And so, again, like we're shaking up systems that ultimately impact real people
Yeah.
who need real resources. And you can do it at this high level.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why I enjoy doing that. And I enjoy the human element of it through and through. Um, I don't, whether I'm an internal evaluator or I'm hired to do it for someplace I don't work, I really like understanding the people behind the program on both sides, the people who are receiving the program and the people who are administering it, because I think that has I know that that has far more impact than whatever we have written down on a sheet of paper.
Yeah.
Because it's real people who are doing the things on the sheet of paper. And so I really like connecting with people in that way and helping them understand their capacity to be more effective if they want, or their capacity to kind of um, shape how they are implementing a program. And if I'm receiving that program, I love, love, love elevating the voices of folks who aren't given enough attention, um, and
Yeah.
making sure that their opinions and experiences and input are elevated and heard and acted upon.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Man, I know this episode is about consulting, but I feel like we could have a whole other episode about program evaluation and what that looks like, and because that sounds really interesting. So, AmeriCorps, you do that for a couple of years. when is the transition? Maybe you have some other jobs before you kind of want to start consulting. Fast forward to
Mhm.
what job you're in, and kind of like thinking about transitioning into consulting, and what's going into that.
Yeah, so I did AmeriCorps for about 3 or 4 months, and then I stayed as a staff member for 2 years
Oh, I
at
see. So you're not
yeah
you're not like still in AmeriCorps. Now you're a staff member at the agency that
at the same
AmeriCorps had
place. Yeah,
placed you.
hmm
Gotcha. Okay.
at the same place doing the same work, and this place is like technically it's a nonprofit. It's kind of a quasi government entity, but I was there for a total of 2.5 years. And I had decided that I had kind of peaked and plateaued, and it was time for me to move on. And the my boyfriend, now husband at the time, was in Chicago, and so I said, well, by this date, no matter what, I'm leaving this job. I'm leaving Virginia and I'm going to go to Chicago. And I applied to a bunch of places, not quite as many as right out of grad school. And eventually I was hired. I moved to Chicago, no job. And that's okay for me. Um, and eventually I got a job at a policy research center in Chicago. And I was there for 3 years. And that my experience at that place was the reason, almost the sole reason why I went into consulting. Um, it was maybe, well, it was a really difficult work environment for me, and created a lot of mental and physical health issues and challenges for me. And so I decided when I left, um, I wasn't ready to risk being in another environment like that. And
Yeah.
so I said, well, I had this idea way, way back when around like, what would it be like to own your own business? Well, I guess I'll try that because I know that my workplace won't be toxic. and so,
Because
and
I'm the
so,
boss.
yeah. I create a great, I think, work environment.
For
And so
myself.
let me try my hand at that. Not really, a- and I think I had the inkling. I had made the final decision, I think, to do that maybe the end of 2019. Question mark? Yeah, no, early 2020, like January, February 2020, I had decided, like, you know what? That is going to be the next step. I don't have a timeline, but that is going to be the next step after I leave this place. And slowly but surely, I put together a plan for what that looked like.
Yeah. And we need to know about this plan. So,
Right.
what things were you considering? And yeah.
Yeah. So I get asked this question a lot around like how do you get into consulting?
Right.
And very much and truly, like the simple answer is you just do it. And also like for and also like that's not all that helpful.
Yeah.
Um and I probably Googled that. How do you get into consulting? And I realized there is no playbook for it.
Yeah.
There are a lot of components that will go into, because it's not just consulting, you are a business owner. Um, there are a lot of
You're
administrative
right.
things.
You're marketing.
You are all the like
You're
you
the
are
accountant. Yeah. You're
yeah,
the
as a solo entrepreneur, yes, you are all of these things. Even though like your skill set is probably like in two lanes, you need to do all five. Um, and so I did understand the components that had to go into at least getting started. And I learned that there was this book, it's called LLCs for Dummies. And like it's that for Dummies whole series, and they have an LLC one, and
interesting.
they break it down in a way that is so accessible. And it
Oh, I've
makes it
never heard of
seem,
that.
yeah, it makes it. because the internet will tell you whatever you want it to tell you, and it can be very overwhelming. And so it was so nice to have one comprehensive tool to use that
Mm-hmm.
explained things to me in a way that were accurate and that were accessible and
Mm-hmm.
actionable. And so that was super helpful just to kind of get a feel for what's step one.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had that. I also made, I had a notebook and I wrote down, um, this is all before I'm an official business. I'm just kind of I'm plotting and scheming
Yeah,
about the
that's
next
what we
step.
need. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
we need the deets about the plot and the scheming.
And I'm writing ideas on what name, like what business name I want, and kind of pros and cons of that. I also make a list. I made a list of things that I'm good at doing, just this long list of here are just the activities that I'm good at doing in a professional setting. And then from that list, I identify what do I enjoy doing, because what I'm not going to do is start a business so I can do things that I don't want to do.
Ooh, yes.
And so I kind of filtered out from that list, and then I drafted kind of some, maybe 2, 3 sentence descriptions of what that is. Like, if I offer this as a service, how can I pitch it either in person or an email or on a website? And so I drafted some descriptions, and I used other consultants as for reference, or not for reference, but just for inspiration, I suppose.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
There's tons of consultants out on the internet. And so if I would find someone who offered services that were kind of similar to mine, I would kind of take note of the wording that they chose and whether I liked it or not. And so that helped shape things. And then I got to legalize myself.
Yeah.
And so I was in Illinois at the time, and so I registered. I decided what kind of business entity I was going to be, and that was an LLC. There are a few other options you can choose from. Um, I knew I wanted to be for profit, so 501(c)(3), 4, etc. were not. I wasn't considering those, and so I chose from the for profit options. And then I just went online to, I think, Secretary of State for Illinois, paid a couple $100. Well, I double checked that my business name wasn't already
Mm-hmm.
chosen.
Good
It
call. Yeah.
wasn't. And then, and they won't allow you to register it if somebody else has it. Um, and then I paid a couple $100 and I was official, at least for a year. I bought myself 1 year as an official business in Illinois. Um, I don't know the order of operations immediately after that. I do know that at some point I had to get insurance, and this is business insurance. And each kind of business um, needs different kinds of insurance. And we're specifically talking about consulting. Some people, maybe you want to sell like a tangible item, like a candle or wardrobe or whatever. But specific to consulting, more often than not, you need something called, I think it's called like general liability. And then there's errors and omissions. And I think there's something else. And I didn't have much guidance there around like, where do I get insurance from?
Mm-hmm.
And so I landed on what I found on the internet and crossed
Yeah.
my fingers.
Yeah.
And so I paid for that. I do not remember exactly how much that cost. I still pay for it. And so if I don't remember, that means it's relatively nominal.
That's
Um,
okay.
and so maybe $200 or so a year,
Mm-hmm.
maybe. Um, and at some point, I did create a website. I don't remember the order of operations, but I think the most impactful act that I took to really start the business was I gathered all the email addresses of folks who I had built relationships with when I was working in traditional settings. And I sent them an email And in the email, I wrote, "Hey, it's me, it's your girl," and I'm like, I own Magnolia Detroit Consulting, and these are the services that will be offered. I would love to talk more about this with you all. And
Mm-hmm.
I sent that out. That was like the announcement, essentially, of the business. And that I got a lot of support. There's one person in particular, he and I worked together um, in Chicago, and he left for a different role, but he's very well connected. And he was kind of like, not kind of, he was, and he didn't name himself this at the time, but he really kind of stepped up as my sponsor. And
Wow.
he put me, he he didn't offer me my first contract, but he offered me the second contract. And it was far more significant than the first contract I had. But I did that, sent out that email, and then there was a second act that I did. And I didn't think twice about this second thing that I did. I just did it, and it happened to be have an amazing ripple effect. So I registered my business like March 15, 16, 2020. And when I started the business, it had a heavy focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion and anti-racism education.
Yeah.
This is March 2020.
Yeah. Wow.
This is like before we've even named COVID as a thing that we
Right.
need to address. And
Right.
then spring, summer 2020 happens, and there's a lot of conversations that people are finally starting to have around racism. And companies have voiced an appetite for education, for change, but for at least for education. And the timing, and so everybody's kind of like the people who provide this kind of education are inundated with requests.
Yeah.
And one company was on LinkedIn and they said, "Hey, we are overwhelmed with how many training requests we are getting. So we have started a Google spreadsheet. If you are a person of color owned business that offers services, education, add your name to this list, and it'll be available to all of the folks who are reaching out to us."
Wow.
I put my name and contact info on that list, and I got my first and several others from that list. I don't even remember I wish I remembered. I don't even remember the name of the company that posted that spreadsheet, but that business was owned by women of color, and they chose to set other people of color up for success. And um, oddly enough, that's not that common. And I always have the utmost respect for people who are willing to do that, who are willing to like, wealth is not finite. There's not just like one pie of money and each of us need to fight for our tiny little sliver. No, there's like enough for all of us to have our own pie.
Yeah.
And so they did what they could to allow other people to make a living.
Yeah.
And so that email to my existing professional network, and then just adding my name to a spreadsheet of a well known entity.
Yeah. Wow. I That is really cool, and I think it's a mini theme throughout our podcast where we've talked about networking, and you already did your networking, and so you were reaching out to those people that just saying, "Hey, I'm doing this now. This is what I'm up to. Do you need this service?" And you're putting yourself out there. That's really bold, and I think that seems to be one of the things that you kind of have to do with consulting is just put your name out there. Go talk to people. Let them know what you're doing. Tell people about what you're up to, because how are they going to know? I think sometimes we think that people are just going to find us somehow. So that's really awesome. And I think that list coming up on LinkedIn of, hey, put your name on here. And sometimes I feel like once we set our intention of how we want to move and what we're trying to do, sometimes things like that just happen, and that's really awesome. Were you working? So when did you stop working?
Yeah.
Um, your last job before starting this?
hmm So I was at this policy and research center. I was in a full-time position until March 2020, and then it was ultra part-time from March until December of 2020. And they
Okay. Okay.
told me ahead of time, like, you're not going to work here after December. And I was like, great. Couldn't come sooner. And so so in between March and December 2020, I am working both things.
Okay.
I'm working my part-time traditional role with a team who was fantastic, by the way. Enough research, you can figure out where I worked. But that last team that I worked with, they were fantastic. And we were doing great work. And then so I'm working with that team, and I'm also setting up just like the administrative part of the LLC. And I'm spending a few months doing that. And eventually I get that first contract in the fall, maybe August or so of 2020. And then I leave that traditional role, and starting January 1, 21, consulting is my full time income. This is my full time job. If I'm going to get income,
Whoa.
it'll have to come through this.
Yeah.
And it is scary and it is exciting, equal parts, to bet on yourself in that way. And one of the things I reminded myself of is that nobody's going to bet on me or believe in me as much as I will. And so I need to go like all in and do everything that I can to make this successful as I had defined success. I will say, I am anti hustle culture now, but in 2020, there was all this rhetoric around like, oh, well, if you don't come out of this year with a new skill or more money or a new job or whatever, like, what have you been doing?
Like, what are you
And
doing
I'm
with your
just,
life?
right, yes, exactly. I'm just like, people are trying to survive. I think that's
Yeah.
what they're
Yeah.
doing.
Right.
But I was influenced by that for a while. And I felt like, well, business owners are supposed to never sleep and you always stay working. And so I didn't have any real boundaries for myself for a couple months. And then eventually I realized this isn't just working 7 days a week is not sustainable. And it's also not all that productive, knowing how I operate. And so I put together a schedule so that I was taking care of myself and practicing better time management. And
Yeah,
then
because
January 1, 2021, this is everything. It's consulting and we'll see how it goes.
wow. Yeah, because I mean, you're not clocking in or clocking out. It's like you could work on it for as long as you want. So, yeah, I run into that sometimes. I'm still working on that, but anyways, your first contract. First, let's talk about first and second contract because you said first contract was a little one, second
Mhm.
one a lot more. Sounds like more pay. Tell us like what you were doing, pay, all of that.
Yeah, the first contract came from that spreadsheet that I put my contact information on, and it was this tech company in California. They wanted a DEI training, and I said, "Yep, I'll do it." I hadn't had anything like put together, but I was like, I know how to work a PowerPoint, and I know how to do research. And so I didn't know, and I think we'll get to this, I didn't know how to price it. And so I just pulled a number out of the sky, and I believe that that contract was for around $1,300.
Okay.
Um, the product that I provided it was an interactive training. The product that I provided, I was happy with. And over time, I made tweaks to it until I no longer offered trainings. That was that first contract. It was just a one time, maybe 2 or 3 hour engagement. And that was that. And then my second one um, came about through who I will say is he operated as a sponsor. He worked at a national foundation, and he was on that email list that I sent out, and he said, "Hey, I'd love to talk more about that." And when he and I worked together, he was aware of challenges that I was having in that workspace. And so he was like a work friend, not just somebody I used to know. And so I think that helped. Like he wanted to help somebody who he had, who like we cared about each other as human beings.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so he's like, well, here's one of the projects we need to hire somebody for. And that aligns with what you said you do. Can you put together a proposal and let me know how you would do it and what you would charge? And he sends me like the project details. I was like, oh, okay, so this is like some real work. this isn't just this isn't just some one-off little training. This was a a larger research project. Um,
Wow.
and so I, again, still not quite knowing how to price things. I think I told him, oh gosh, and this was going to be for 3 months. We had already agreed it would be like a 3 month engagement. I think quoted maybe like $7,000, which was and is a lot of money on its own. And he came back and he said, "Oh, okay, no, we will pay." I want to say he said maybe 11 or 12,000, or no, oh no, he said 15,000.
He's like, no,
And
we're
I was,
doubling. We're practically doubling
yeah.
what you just said because no.
And so, and I think that, and I haven't, and I'll never know. But I think that he asked me just as like a
Just to see.
courtesy.
Uh,
And I, very similar to the folks who started that spreadsheet, he was in a position of power and had access to resources and knew that I was just getting started
yeah.
and
Yeah.
still learning. And he could have paid me what I quoted him,
Yeah.
but he chose not to.
Yeah.
And that really opened my eyes. What the foundation paid me um, really opened my eyes to the value of my work
Yeah.
and what people are willing to pay. And so
Mm-hmm.
that set the stage for some more strategic pricing, coupled with I had relationships with a couple entrepreneurs, solo entrepreneurs who were doing consulting, and both of them were very giving of their time and helping me try to figure out how to do a lot of things, like how to put together a contract, how to price your work,
Mm-hmm.
how to manage time. And so I had people in my corner, which is so impactful.
Yeah.
And they
Yeah.
didn't have to be there.
Mm-hmm. And I think there's like talking about reaching out to people that are in your network and that know your work ethic. I think it also was in your favor that you've worked with this guy before. He knows that you can bring it, and so I don't know. I could see that being another reason why he would want to say like, no, actually, we're going to pay you more because I know what your work ethic is like versus someone who doesn't know you. They're trying to save, they have bills to pay and all of that, and yeah, and maybe that wasn't a factor, but that's interesting. I had a
Yeah.
question. So, in terms of pricing, do you have any tips or just kind of like what has been your go-to? I don't know. Is there a go-to way of pricing your services? What kind of tips would you give people for starting out?
First, I'll say it may be specific to industry. I fell into organizational consulting genre.
Yeah.
So I was offering organizational assessments, program evaluations, research, facilitation, and report writing. And I asked, sorry, um, we can, you can leave that in actually. I am normal like everyone and I get caught up. So at any rate, I asked a couple of the consultants who I knew, like, what do you think of this rate? And I think I offer $75 as a rate, hourly rate. And they're like, no, um, don't. She said, one of them, she told me, she said, at the minimum, like the bare minimum, even if you're entry level consulting, she said, start at 150. And that felt a bit jarring for me. And so I think maybe I landed on 125 for an hourly rate. That didn't last long. I went up after that. Um, but I did the
To what?
125.
What'd you go up to?
Well, eventually I pushed more for a flat rate, not an
Okay.
hourly rate. And I did that
Okay.
for a couple reasons. So an hour, just in case, folks don't know.
Yeah.
So an hourly rate is, let's say you have an hourly rate of $150 and you tell your client it's going to take me 10 hours to complete this work. So you just do the multiplication, 10 times 150, that's what the client pays you. Alternatively, you charge what's called a flat rate. And so I think that 10 by 150 math is $1,500. Alternatively, you charge a flat rate and you can say, I'm going to charge you $2,000 to do this work. You don't need to, and I'll finish it by, August. They don't need to know how much time you are spending on that project.
Right. Yes.
And
Such a
I shifted as much as my clients were willing to flat rates because first off, I don't need you to look at my invoice and tell me I'm spending too much time on one thing or another. Granted, that never happened, and I wanted to make sure that it didn't happen.
mm-hmm.
Um, Also, I did the math. I actually make more hourly if I charge a flat rate than I do hourly. The math works out depending on the project. It was up to maybe like 250 or 275.
Yeah.
If I charged a flat rate and then I would track my hours internally, I would just track on my end and then I would do the math afterwards. And I was making more money that way.
Yeah.
And we don't need to concern myself. You don't need to concern yourself with how I'm spending the time. What you need to concern yourself is like how our working relationship is and the quality of the deliverables that I'm providing you and my adherence to a timeline.
Yeah. And when you're paying my invoice.
Correct. Correct.
Thirdly,
Yeah.
did you have
Yeah.
any trouble? Did you have any trouble with people paying you?
One client who I will not name,
Yes.
yes, there was only one um, organization where it got to a point where I had to tell them, I will no I can no longer work on this project until you pay the invoice. Um, and that's the only leverage you have, is I won't provide you any more work unless you pay me.
Mm,
If they choose not to pay, if they chose not to pay me, I could either pursue it legally, and I had already decided I'm not going to do that.
yeah.
It'll cost me more if I go that route. Um, or I'll just let it go and I'm done with this. And you have received my skills for free.
Yeah.
They did pay me eventually, um, but I just kind of took note of that and
Mm-hmm.
decided I probably don't want to work with them again in the
Yeah.
future.
When you are sending invoices do you have people, so say you have a 3 month project, this is my price. Do they pay half up front, half later? How does that work?
I tried the whole pay me half now and the half later, and nobody was really on board with that. And so I said, that's okay. And so the typically it's a more often than not, it's a monthly um,
Okay.
invoice. And
Okay.
so I will in this invoice, and I use QuickBooks Online to track contracts and invoices and what's been paid and not paid and all that jazz. I will send you a monthly invoice that outlines what I have done that month.
Mm.
Sometimes you set it up where it's what's called deliverable based. And so I say I'm going to do three things in this contract. I will conduct research, I will analyze data, and I will provide a report and a presentation. And so I will send three invoices, one when the first thing is done, the second thing is done, and the third thing is done. And that might not be a recurring cadence. Maybe it takes me 2 months to do one thing, 1 month to do another, and 3 months to do another. And
Yeah.
so, we're touching on one of the characteristics of consulting, which is inconsistent paychecks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a whole other conversation in terms of budgeting and how you plan your finances and yeah. Um wow, I I have so many more questions, but I think are there any other resources? I know you mentioned the LLC for Dummies, QuickBooks. Any other resources or books that you felt were super helpful for you?
I have this, I think, in my notes. Um, One of the things I'll say is I am a resource. Um,
Yes.
I understand how confusing and overwhelming it can be to figure out how to get into consulting. First, you need to ask yourself, though, is that what you want to do? And after the answer is yes, then it can be very overwhelming to figure out what do I do next. And I benefited from people who are willing to volunteer their time and expertise. And it only makes sense to me to offer that moving forward. And I've done that in the past, and I will continue um, to do it. And
Well,
so,
thanks for offering.
yes, and I don't charge. If you live, I will say this: if you live locally, I'm going to ask that you at least take me out for coffee. But otherwise, like, don't worry about it. Um, and and so that tangible the most tangible resource I had was that book,
Yeah.
LLC for Dummies,
Yeah.
and other entrepreneurs, even if they're not in your field, they can still offer some valuable insight as to like their lessons learned, or oh no, I would consider getting insurance with them instead of that because XYZ. And a huge, huge, huge resource is yourself and the grace that you offer to yourself. I figured out so many things along the way, and I continue. So, consulting isn't my full time job anymore, but I figured out so many things along the way, and I made a difficult decision to take the pressure off of myself to not have it all figured out before I did anything. I love to procrastinate. That is my favorite pastime. I am also type A, and I am also a perfectionist. And so I can stall something
Yeah.
into oblivion. And and so just like the first question I think you asked me was like, how do you get started? And I was like, just do it. So that's always like, just do something. Just do something. Find a
Yeah.
name,
Don't procrastinate.
figure out
Yeah.
what you want to offer, register yourself, like just do something to start the momentum and understand that you will learn things along the way.
Yeah. Yeah. That's huge because, like you said, there's no roadmap to this. I mean, you know, I'm trying to just share stories like yours and others so that people can get kind of some inspiration and some tips, but ultimately there's no playbook. So yeah, just get started and take that first step. No procrastinating. So you are, last thing, what are you doing now? What's going on?
Yeah, so I super abbreviated timeline. I did full-time consulting for about 2.5 years. That was my sole income. And then I returned to traditional employment a couple years ago. And I was doing program evaluation. I left that role earlier this year and I went back into consulting. And while still doing consulting, I started a job as I'm an associate director of research and evaluation at a local nonprofit. So a little bit of consulting um, and all the time, full time job, traditional role.
Yeah. When you were consulting the first time, 2.5 years, what would you say your yearly salary was about?
Yeah. So my salary is what I paid myself, and the business revenue is something else.
Good
Um,
point.
so the first year is technically 2020. And so the revenue, which is just every single, not profit, but just every single dollar that came into the business, that first year was around 15,000. And then after that, it was 90,000 and then 97. And then after I kind of eased out, I started to ease out of consulting. It was 20, around 20, and that was the revenue. And I paid myself net 38,000, and I landed, and the rest went to retirement, primarily retirement. Um, and there are some administrative like fees to keep a business alive. I had an accountant. I mentioned insurance, some websites, stuff like that. I chose to pay myself very modestly. Um, why I couldn't tell you, but that was enough for me to live the life that I wanted to live.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
And
all
so
that's
my
important.
salary, yeah, so my salary was 38,000 net, and then the revenue was at its peak 97.
Thank you for sharing. Really appreciate that. If anyone wants to talk with you, connect with you, where should they go?
So I'm not really on the internet like that. But my email address, which I guess we can include in the show notes.
In the
Just
show
join, yeah, it's
notes.
my last name without the hyphen, joinerhill@gmail.com. I am always willing to just kind of either be talked at or talk with someone,
Yeah.
especially so everyone, and also um, I'll kind of move mountains to do what I can to support other Black women in professional spaces.
Love that. How about LinkedIn? Yes?
I am on LinkedIn, or LinkedIn, as my father calls it.
Oh my gosh, that's cute. LinkedIn.
Yes.
Okay, I will also put that link in the show notes. Well, great. Thank you so much for all of that. That was lots of lots of helpful tips there. And yeah, if you need some support, consulting, getting started, reach out to Amber. Maybe that's your first step instead of procrastinating the idea. Your first step is reaching out to Amber. Interesting idea. Well, thanks everyone for listening, and we'll be back in 2 weeks.